Here we go with one of Marvel's recent figures, M.O.D.OK. And I'm glad we didn't have to buy 7 figures to put this thing together. If you have this figure, you know what a cool figure it is, especially of the fact that you have 2 swappable faces, and then you can store one on the inside. But we're going to light one of these up with a Lego light kit, a very basic kit from Lego, which just consists of 3 LEDs. One is a blinking one that comes off of a board that is for the miniature LEDs, and all working off of an internal battery inside the head compartment. So the best thing to do is to heat up the plastic before working on it, either with a hairdryer or hot water. In this case, I used hot water because it was a bigger piece, and there's lots of glue around the edges, particularly at the corners. And at the corners is where you actually want to start, because it's a thicker part of the piece, and you can actually exert more force and then work your way down through the edges. Now, for video purposes, I've already achieved this, and I just want to show you what I did. Taking a small thin screwdriver, a flathead, moving along the edge while it's still hot, then you can repeat the heating process if it cools down on you, which you probably will have to do because it did take me a good 20 minutes to separate it. Now, once separated on the inside, you have the faceplate or the eye plate, and that is also glued down at 4 corners. The glue on this is very minimal, and you can just pop it off using the screwdriver. You can heat it if you like, but it will pop off easily. So that's it. That is all that creates the look of the eyes on the inside. So now we have to create our own eyes to put on the inside so that the LEDs can shine through. Now, I came across somebody else's video, and I found what was really cool, and it's working with resin. And this is what we're going to use to create the eyes for M.O.D.OK. So with resin, you do have to cure it with a UV light, and the UV light is what is going to make it turn into a hard, solid plastic. As you see here, this is part of what I bought on Amazon for about 25 bucks, and this is what we're going to get started with. UV resin to make new eyes is what we're going to use, but we need a mold, and I proceeded to buy a mold at Michael's. This is what I came up with first, and it's actually for jewelry. That's why you have a hole in the center to put a wire through or a thread to hold all these beads together, and that's why there's a stem on the inside. Well, I proceeded to remove the stem on one of those because I don't want the stem to leave a hole. I removed it on the small one and then on the large one to be able to run some tests with to see what is going to come up for me. So in the process, after starting with the smaller one, I went into the larger size bead, and I filled it with the resin, and then I ended up with this. I still wasn't very happy. I ended up having that hole in the center. Even though I removed it, I didn't remove enough of it. I ended up having to go back in and remove more of that stem. So I did another one. This time I pinched it in the center to be able to make it an oval, because I didn't want a round bead. It just doesn't fit in that eye socket. And if you look at the eyes, they're not round, they're an oval, an almond shape. And of course, I just was not achieving that. So then I got another one, and it looked much better, but this time I had to figure out how I was going to turn it white. So I ended up frosting it by doing some sanding, and I'll show you that in just a moment. It still wasn't there. I wasn't happy with what was there, because regardless, I would have to shape it to this almond shaped size, and that was going to require lots of grinding and sanding and test fitting, and it was just going to be tedious. So I figured I had to make my own mold. I came across another video on YouTube that shows how to do this, and consequently enough, you use some latex, liquid latex. Well, liquid mass is the same as liquid latex. So I proceeded to make my own mold out of epoxy. And of course, it had to be an exact fit. So I coated the eye with the liquid latex, or the liquid masking, and then I proceeded to mold the epoxy over it. After it dried, I removed it and I got myself a perfect mold. Now, the plastic tray will actually let go of the resin because it does not stick to it. So to avoid it from sticking onto my mold, I had to apply the liquid mask, and I had to apply it on all 4 sides. And this is what we ended up with. I'll show you in just a minute how I did it. So I ended up with a exact eye shape for MODOK. So all I gotta do now is repeat that for the other side. And as you can see, it is an exact fit without having to do any more grinding and sanding and fitting. I like this much better. And if you look on the other side, oh, hold on, you pop that back in there because it's still not set. I haven't glued it in. I'll show you how to do that in just a moment as well. It looks so much better, especially since we're going to be lighting it up. So, this is the kit that we're going to use. LED from Lego. Comes with a battery set all ready to go with 6 ports to handle 6 lights. And this is what it's going to look like. This is our little preliminary test. So yeah, I like this. It looks really good. Now we got to continue on and finish up the rest of it. So as I mentioned before, I had to decide how I was going to get some white into the eyes. I tried using some paint or some tint, and I just didn't like it. It was too opaque, and I didn't like the way it looked. So I tried with another one, and I found out that my best thing to do was not to fill that mold all the way to the top, just halfway full to be able to get this concave into it. And as you can see, it looks that much better because it can actually work as a lens. So I then proceeded to do that onto the piece that I made already, but let me show you how I created that piece. So here's our mold made from epoxy. I'm going to go ahead and use the liquid mask or liquid latex, whichever you may have in hand, or if you want to acquire one, either one will work just fine. So what you want to do is apply it just a few drops, and then you want to spread it around, and you want to knock out those bubbles. You want to make sure that it's an even coated surface on all 4 sides. And just take your time. It's not a race. It does dry and become sticky and gooey, so you want to be able to manipulate it while it is still in liquid form. And this is where you can take the time to knock out those bubbles, because if they are in there, they will distort the final product, and then you'll just have to start over. Now, the reason I have to do this is because if I put the resin in here without the liquid latex, it's just going to stick to it and I'll never get it out. It's going to be there permanently. So to be able to remove it, this liquid latex will then provide that barrier so that it does not stick permanently. I will still be able to remove it. I'll have to use a sharp or small screwdriver, a flathead, to get it into the edge to wedge it out. So once you have your bubbles out of there, you can take it to your hair dryer and then dry it completely. So you cannot put in the resin while it's wet. It must be totally dry for this to work properly. Once totally dry, you'll be able to see if you missed any spots, or if you have any high spots, or if you've got any bubbles that are going to be distorting it, and you'll have to just peel it out and start over. It's not a big expense, and it does not take a lot of your time. So if you repeat it once or twice, not a problem. Do it right. You don't want to be creating several different eyes that come out wrong. So here's our finished product, and now we're going to fill it halfway, and then we're going to cure it with the UV light until it's a solid resin. So here we go with the resin. a drop at a time. Make sure the bubbles do not go in there, because if there are bubbles in there, then we have to burst those bubbles. So here we go. It just takes a few drops, and we don't want to fill it to the top. We want to only go halfway so that it has a concave look to it, because as it dries, the actual resin will shrink and the center will deepen and go concave, which is going to be great because it's going to provide a place to put the LED, and it'll act as a lens once we have the rest of the resin on top of that to hold that LED down. So here we are. We're going to put it on top of the mold that I bought at Michael's just to hold it here for us, and then we're just going to leave the UV light over the top of it, and that should take about 3 to 4 minutes for this amount of resin. Not a whole lot of time is required. We just want enough to be able to hold it. It does actually get hot. That's why you don't want to hand hold it. And of course you don't want to point this in the wrong direction. You want to point it only at the resin that you want to cure. And from here I do see a tiny little bubble that I was not attentive to when I was working on this, because I was working behind the camera. So in any case, that's not going to be an issue. It's too small to be affecting what we're going to be doing with the LED. So I pulled it off the mold, and in my hand I can feel the heat that it caused from that UV light. So once it's totally cured, or enough for us to handle to manipulate, because we still have to cure it again once we pull it out, because depending on how thick the resin is, it takes that much longer to dry. Because this is roughly let's say a 3/8 of an inch thick, which is pretty thick for a resin. It's going to take a little longer to dry than just a few minutes. So we've got to pull it out of the mold first, and then we got to turn it over and cure the other side. And we don't want to work on this piece of resin as far as doing any sanding until it's totally dry. So we want to give it at least another 30 minutes to an hour for it to truly set, and then work on it. Now, as I mentioned, I have to wedge in the screwdriver to be able to remove it. It does take a while because it's an exact fit to what I have on this mold. So this technique of using resin to create a bulb or a lens, etc., works really well, and it really adds another dynamic to the figure that you're working on. In this case, M.O.D.OK is going to have himself some lighted eyes that are going to be that much more dynamic to the figure. So here it is. It's an exact duplicate of the eye. I'm going to remove the liquid latex or the liquid mask, depending on what you used, and here we go. Now, there is a slight texture to the eye, as you can tell from the camera here, and there is probably a small dimple that you can probably observe in there depending on how it's lit. That's not going to be an issue because we're going to sand it down to make it look frosted. And regardless if it does have a texture on it, again, it's going to be diminished by the sanding that we're going to do. Now remember, you want to make sure it's fully cured before you do any work on the piece. So if it's still a bit sticky, you definitely want to put it under the UV light for another few minutes, and that's going to be determined how thick the UV resin is that you've used. So the thicker it is, the longer it's going to take to cure. But once it's fully ready to go, then you can sand it, you can drill it, etc. In this case, let me show you what we've got on our hands. That's it. It's ready. We just got to grind down those edges and sand down the top so that it creates a frosted lens. And then now we're going to retrofit it into the face and do a little test fitting. And there it is. They fit exactly into the eye sockets. All we got to do now is hold them down with a little bit of glue once we have them fully sanded. That's it. Look at that. It looks awesome. So before we do anything else, we want to go ahead and drill that center bulb in the center of his forehead. So create a little dimple first, and then take your Dremel, and then slowly work your way through the head from one side to the other. And it is a thick plastic, so it's going to take you a few minutes to get through it. So it's not a race, take your time. So once it's fully drilled out, we're going to clean it. I want to make sure that the LED that we put in here has enough space to accommodate the bulb or the diode that we're going to use, and then we're going to attach it by using a small Lego that we're going to grind down to a little nub, and we're going to pop it into this center piece. And all we've got to do now is make sure that we go all the way through the other side so that we have enough leadway also for that wire to go all the way through. And then we're going to seal it up on the back end with some hot glue so that the wire does not slide out. And we'll do that by positioning it first, because we'll be able to see it as we have it lit, and then put the hot glue in the back so that we position it directly in the center of that red plastic that we're going to put in the front, which is a piece of Lego. So let's clean it out first. Make sure there are no obstructions on the inside. There's no edges. We might have to cut those with a knife or a small pair of scissors. So once you have it all drilled out and you put in that little Lego piece in there, it's ready for another testing. So I've already wired the pieces into the back. This is the panel that has the LED that flashes hooked up to the batteries, and then it's got the other two LEDs for the eyes. But this is our test for that center blinking light. It looks pretty good. It was really difficult to get it in there. That plastic is, although it's soft, even when you heat it up, it was still difficult. So moving on to the eyes, we're going to sand the lens to give it a frosted look. I've already sanded one of them. This is what we want to achieve. This is all I did. I took this 200 grit sanding block and I just sanded it down until it looked frosted. So it'll take you a few minutes to get this done, and once it's finished, you're ready to test fit it again. Now that we've got the sanding down, we're going to put it into the socket with the eyes facing the correct way. And now we're going to hold them down with a little bit of hot glue so that as we attach the LEDs to the eyes, the lenses we created don't go around moving on us. But this is how they look. They look pretty cool. Now you can use your choice of glue for this. I'm using hot glue. You don't need a lot, just a few drops on the corners to hold the eyes in place. If you want to use super glue or Gorilla Glue or whatever it is, all you need is one drop on each corner. You only want to hold the eye in place while you do the rest of the work. And the rest of the work is attaching the LEDs to the center of the eye. So make sure the surface that you're going to be working on or attaching the LED to is completely clean, so that there's no dirt, there's no stray fibers of hot glue or anything else in there, because they will show up even as a silhouette on the other side. You want a completely clean surface to work on. So now we're going to secure the LED with resin. So we want a small drop of resin over the area that we want. And this is either eye, whichever you want to start with. We want to have our UV light ready to go. That's the flashing that you saw there just a moment ago. So one drop in the center. It's going to be just enough to manipulate it, tilting it back and forth until it's in the center. And that's why you want it to be concave, because it'll be easier to hold it in center. If it was flat, it would be that much more difficult. I'm going to use this to prop up an edge so I can see what I'm doing. And then with the tweezers, I am going to hold it in the drop of resin and hold the UV light over the top. And within just a few seconds, it's going to start to cure and then hold the LED. Now once that is attached, you can then remove the tweezers that you were using to hold it in. And now all you've got to do is fill it with resin from the top so that it is fully encased in resin and creates a true lens for the LED to transmit all of that light. And once again, of course, you want to use the UV light to cure it and harden it in place. And it is at this point that you can actually fill it up so that it comes out to the very edges, and then it will actually act as a glue and secure it permanently to the faceplate. And once you're done with this, then repeat the same for the second side. Now this is always a challenge, to be neat and tidy when you have so many wires. But do your best and close it neatly into the faceplate. Do not glue the back of the faceplate to the actual piece. The reason is because you have a switch on it, and if you glue it, you're not going to be able to get to that switch. The best thing to do is to add a magnet to keep it closed, and I'll have that in the next video. For now, I want to show you what it looks like as if it were finished. So I'm just going to neatly tidy up things in here and then cover it with the back plate to then attach it to the body. Just one more light test before we put it on the body. And I hope you enjoyed part 1 of the customization of MODOK. If you do like the video, remember to like, comment, and of course, subscribe. And in the meantime, keep customizing.